Hi, everyone. Welcome to a session from Field to Funder, from Inputs to Insight, the 5 levels of MEL Data Flow. My name is Utsav Poddar. I'm the Director of Solutions Architecture at Vera Solutions, and my co-host today is Zak Kaufman, co-founder and CEO of Vera Solutions. Zak, do you want to
Hey
give
everybody.
a
Yeah. Hey everybody. Zach, great to see everyone. Thanks for joining our session. My background is in monitoring evaluation and epidemiology. Actually, it's a topic I'm really excited about, and we want to keep this as engaging as possible. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the chat as we're going through it.
Yeah, please utilize the chat fully, ask your questions as we go along the session, and we'll save a good bunch of time towards the end so that we can dive into more interactive discussion rather than just the slides that we are presenting. So over the last more than 12 years now, Vera has worked with a number of impact-focused organizations throughout the different phases of their impact data management journey. Our learnings around this topic today come directly from that experience. These organizations are faced with a number of challenges when it comes to getting a 360-degree view of their impact data. In today's session, we will look at what are the different dimensions of impact data, what are the different levels at which organizations try to track impact data, what are the needs at those levels, what are the challenges that they run into, and lastly, what are the 4 pillars of good impact data management that we have seen. But first, we'll talk a little bit about the Vera backstory, and for that, I'll turn it over to you, Zak.
Great. And I just want to check to see if people can hear me. I think Utsav, you can hear me, but we got a few folks in the chat that said they couldn't hear me. Okay, hooray! You can hear me. Excellent. Okay, I don't know what was going on before, but great to see everybody. And let's dive on into it. So let's dive on into our slide. So yeah, we wanted to kind of set a little context for where we've come from and kind of the journey that Vera Solutions has been on. Because actually, I think it's a really interesting sort of example of data flow for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So as Utsav mentioned, I'm a co-founder of Vera Solutions. 15 years ago, I moved to South Africa and was working in monitoring and evaluation at a growing nonprofit. We had about 3 million, 4 million in revenue per year, and we were growing quite rapidly. The scale of the program was growing a lot, and we were about to get a big grant from the US government to 10x the size of our program in South Africa. And one of the problems was that our data systems were kind of a mess. This was kind of this is what our data systems looked like. So we had stacks of paper kept in file cabinets that only got digitized every 3 months, every quarter, and each site would then kind of email in to the HQ an aggregate picture of what interventions or programs have been delivered in the last 3 months. And this may look a little familiar if some of your organizations have had some sort of Excel and paper-based sorts of solutions. We were tracking a lot of valuable data, attendance, participant information, questionnaires, and information related to HIV testing and referrals. But we really didn't get a lot of value out of it. We were kind of drowning in dead data, and that was kind of the system that I inherited, system, if we want to call it that. And so what it kind of looked like was this. So you had these stacks of paper that got digitized at the program site at that local level into an Excel spreadsheet that got brought into this like monster Excel spreadsheet at HQ. And then ultimately you had one person sitting on top of this pyramid in the organization who was responsible for, ultimately sending off PDFs to funders saying, hey, we reached 5,678 kids in the quarter. These are the results. And so if you're looking at this, there's a lot of problems with this picture, right? The first problem is there's no feedback loops. So when I went out to talk with staff in the field about it, what they're telling me was that, it feels like we're being policed. Like we never see what comes from the data that we're putting all this time and energy into. We just get told, oh, we haven't gotten your report yet, So they didn't really feel bought in and didn't feel a sense of ownership over the system. The other problem is that mistakes get made at every level, right? So you have human beings counting the numbers from those sheets and entering that into Excel. You have mistakes that get made when you copy from one Excel to another Excel. And so data quality can take a big hit when you're relying on humans to do things that systems or automated systems tend to be a little bit better at, right? And data quality obviously is a key cornerstone of good monitoring, evaluation, and learning. The other thing that was a problem with this system was we weren't digitizing or capturing the individual level data. We were only digitizing aggregate data. And so that kind of restricted us in a couple ways. One was a big part of this was that we were kind of limited in the questions that we could answer based on the structure of that Excel spreadsheet. And so we couldn't ask new questions of the data because we were just kind of limiting ourselves from the get-go by saying, okay, well, there's this Excel sheet you need to get it into. It's got merged cells everywhere. And like, this is the one way we're going to be analyzing that data, as opposed to digitizing individual level data or individual questionnaires and then being able to run, more interesting analysis on that over time. And the other problem was we needed to scale this 10x from 5,000 kids to 50,000 kids per year. And this system was really, really cumbersome, in addition to having issues with respect to data quality and issues with respect to buy-in and the perceived value that our staff got. So they gave me the jump drive for the last 6 years of data and said, okay, well, we're just trying to keep up with scaling this program. We need you, you're in charge now, right? Like, you're going to take over data management and M&E for this program. And I asked, can I change it? And the answer was, well, what do you have in mind? And I had kind of a wacky idea at the time, which was I'd been administering our Salesforce database for tracking our donors and our donations and our events and our campaigns. And I found that on that side of the organization, we had really rich individual level data. We had dashboards, showing everybody how we were doing against our fundraising targets. And then I came into this side, and on the program side, which is, arguably more important, we were kind of drowning in Excel spreadsheets, right, and didn't really have very valuable, didn't have valuable data that was driving the same kind of insight. And so we set out to overhaul that and brought it onto Salesforce for program management. And this was back in 2008, 2009. So now it's actually something that, really thousands of organizations are using Salesforce in this sort of way, but it was a quite novel use of the platform back then. And really what we learned was actually Salesforce as a platform could be really powerful for managing program data, for tracking the impact of an organization, whether it's just tracking reach data, like how many kids are coming through the program by month, and breaking that down by sex and age and other ways, or looking at outcome data, in this case, like knowledge and attitudes and communication related to HIV, but bringing these into feedback loops so that everybody in the organization had visibility and data became part of the lifeblood and part of the culture of the organization. So that completely really changed the way that organization was working. And out of that, other organizations started coming to us and saying, that's exactly what we need. How do we do this? And so we created Vera Solutions to help other organizations go through that same kind of transformation and really help them get off of spreadsheets, onto the cloud, off of paper, onto mobile, and leverage existing technologies to improve the way they work, improve the way that they track their impact, and improve ultimately the efficiency and the effectiveness of the programs that they're running. And so that's kind of where we are today. So we've been at this for 12 years. We've grown to a team of 118 now around the globe, work with over 400 organizations, and happy to chat if people want to about more about what Vera does. But the session's really not about us. It's really about the topic of MEL Data Flow. So we want to give this as context because I think it's a good example of how MEL Data Flow wasn't working in one organization, and we changed it and got it to start working. But we want to kind of back up a little bit and talk a little bit more about what do we mean first when we talk about MEL data or when we talk about impact data, and give a little bit of a framework for thinking about this. And then kind of Utsav will unpack how that data then flows through an organization. So what do we mean by MEL data or impact data? So I like to break it down like this. I like to say that there's 4 key types of quantitative and qualitative data to help us understand an organization's impact or a program's impact. And they are definitely not mutually exclusive. But they are mutually reinforcing, and they're all super important. So the first is getting a handle on reach. So this is tracking things like the number of people that are participating in the program, but having a really good handle on the demographics of that data. For example, you might be looking at other types of reach, whether that's wells or latrines or acres of land or tons of carbon. You can track reach in zillions of different ways. And for all the organizations on the call, I'm sure you've got slightly different reach indicators that you're monitoring. That's one piece of it, right? Another piece is depth. Also generally looked at quantitatively, but you can also look at it qualitatively as well. And so we might be looking at increases in savings or increases in output or increases in literacy, numeracy, reductions in dropout. Basically, we're tracking the outcomes of a program, the outcomes of an organization, and how much we're moving the needle per unit of reach, if you see what I mean. The third, which often people don't maybe think about as much, is actually feedback. So you could look at this in terms of satisfaction surveys. You can run focus groups to really understand the how and the why of your reach and your depth. So evidence stems from asking questions, and it depends what kinds of questions we want to answer. That's going to tell us the type of data that we want to focus on. If we're answering questions around how much, right, or who, then we're going to focus on reach and maybe a bit on depth. If we're trying to answer questions around how or why, we really want to make sure we're incorporating a methodology that is going to help us get at feedback from participants, feedback from staff, feedback from our other constituents. And the fourth piece is stories. So stories let us just dive really deep into one specific use case and just unpack and add some really flavor and interest to the rest of the impact picture. So none of these is sufficient, right? If you're an organization, you're not going to have sustainable and strong monitoring, evaluation, and learning practices if you're just focused on one or two of these types of data. You can think of it a little bit like having a nutritious and delicious meal, right? So you really need a number of different components. And if you ask my team, they'll tell you that I really love belabored metaphors, especially if they're about food. So here's my belabored metaphor for the day. So if we think about different types of impact data or different types of MEL data as components of a nutritious meal, let's think about it like a stir fry. So you've got your reach, your depth, your feedback, and your stories. And if we get it right, that'll come together to make a really nice, delicious, and nutritious stir fry, right? Your reach is like your starch in that stir fry. There's different kinds of starch. We got some nice brown rice here. Your depth is really your protein. So it's really giving the substance, and it's what makes that program last, right? Knowing that we're actually having some outcomes that are long lasting from this program. Feedback is like your veggies. So we don't always want our veggies, but they're good for us, and they're add a little bit of crunch. They're add a little bit of interest to that stir fry. And the stories are like the sauce, right? Bring it together and help give it some flavor, some really human connection to the impact that we're creating. So that's my brief metaphor for the day. But hopefully this is helpful in kind of thinking about not just one-dimensionally, but thinking about different types of impact data or monitoring, evaluation, and learning data. And what we'll get into a little bit later is then how do we operationalize that? Where can we kind of put our efforts in strengthening maybe where we might be a little bit weak, or we might need to make some changes or improvements in our organization. But I will hand over to, I'll give maybe just one example before I hand back to Utsav of just an organization that I think is doing a great job of this across the four levels, which is World Bicycle Relief. So they're distributing bicycles for a variety of different programs. So they have programs focused on healthcare. They have programs focused on education for girls in particular. They have programs focused on job creation and supporting micro entrepreneurs. And so they're looking at their reach across these different types of programs. And they have at their fingertips, again, leveraging Salesforce in their case, and an app called TerraWorks, where they're tracking each point at the point of distribution of each bicycle. They're tracking who did this bicycle go to, how old is that person, what's their sex, where are they, and so forth. And so they're able to then build up a dashboard that gives them a clear picture and feed that data into their annual reports, for example. For depth, they partnered with Innovations for Poverty Action to run a randomized controlled trial back in 2019 to evaluate their education program. And they were able to see that they reduced absenteeism by 29% or 28%, among girls that received bicycles. And they reduced their commute time by 33% and saved them about an hour per day on average, which is really, really compelling evidence. But that's just one of their programs. So what did they do? They followed that up the next year and did another RCT in Zimbabwe on a different program, looking at changes in household income, looking at productivity and prosperity. So looking at depth is not a one-off, you're done kind of exercise. It's something you really need to continue to assess over time. Whereas reach is usually actually, if you're doing it well, baked into the day-to-day running of a program. For feedback, again, they're using TerraWorks for that and getting feedback from their mechanics on what's going well, but they do feedback in a zillion ways. And they have, if you go look at their website or their annual reports, you'll see loads of really great stories about how they're moving the needle for individual, for communities or for individuals, and the change that they're making, and really, again, adding some flavor, adding some color to the numbers that are getting reported with reach. So this is kind of one really just good example of an organization that is doing a nice job across these four levels. But it sounds simple, right? But what Utsav is going to unpack here is really the mechanics, right, and the different levels of data flow that you need to nail down to get this working properly. So over to Utsav.
Great, thank you, Zach. So what we've heard so far is how how to think about impact data. What is impact data, right? Like, what are the different types of impact data that we want to see in a holistic view of an organization's impact? What we are now looking at is more the mechanics of data management. So when you know you have an impact data strategy with the 4 different types of impact data, how do you manage that data through the different levels of an organization? The example we see on the screen is going to be more relevant for an enterprise NGO or a global grant maker or a multilateral organization, but some or a subset of these levels will be relevant to almost all impact organizations. We have run into this time and again with smaller or larger organizations that we've worked with. So the 5 levels that we broadly classify the data flow needs across are the point of service level, the local office level, the national and regional office level, the headquarters or HQ, and finally the external sources. So the external destinations, which could be funders for the organization, which could be public-facing websites or what have you, and again, destinations like IRT, if an organization is publishing to IRT as a framework. These are the broad 5 levels that we're going to look at from a MEL data needs and challenges perspective for an organization. However, throughout the mechanics of data management, the needs and challenges exist not just within each of these levels, but also across the levels. So the movement of data from point of service to local office, or from local office to regional office to HQ to funders, or the other way around when we're talking about disseminating decision and insights from HQ to national to local to point of service. And alongside that, we'll see a collection of tools that we come across in the ecosystem being used at the different levels. They have evolved over the last 10, 12 years. We used to see quite a lot in every different level, but over time we have seen some tools condense into more centralized platforms like Salesforce or AMP Impact or D365, especially at the national, regional level and HQ level, but we would still see some varied examples. One quick flag is this is our session today is not an endorsement of any particular tool here. This is just a representation of some of the tools that we have seen in the ecosystem being used by the organizations. So we're going to dive into the details of each of these levels. So first we look at the point of service level. So when we talk about MEL data at the point of service level, we are generally talking about more granular data, more transactional data. So think survey data collection or attendance tracking that needs to be done in the field. That kind of data actually becomes a key source of our MEL data for the organization. And we have seen a number of different needs at the field level, at the point of service level. A lot of times those revolve around offline capabilities from the tools that are used by the users, mobile-based connectivity. So users want hardware that can be easily taken out in the field and either through iPads or tablets or mobile phones, or through just the ability to do that in an offline context using the same devices. Simplicity is a big need that we have seen at this level because a lot of times there isn't a ton of capacity and desire to invest a lot in capability and trainings at this level. So the tools that we use at this level need to be simple to use so that a wide variety of people, as well as a large number of enumerators, can actually use these tools to collect the point of service data. Hardware becomes a big need, so the tools that we use should be compatible with multiple types of hardwares, operating systems, firmwares, and many languages. Potentially, you're looking at, for a global organization operating in multiple countries and multiple geographies, you're looking at multiple language contexts that the end enumerators or data collectors would be working on in the field. Alongside those, they go hand in hand with the challenges that the tools need to overcome. Offline capability, while it's a desire, gives us the challenge of offline access. But at the end of the day, what we want is online and centralized data processing for that data. So that becomes a challenge for these tools to tackle. Portability of the tool. So between different devices, between different firmwares and operating systems, how easily can you use one particular tool? Can you use one through a web browser versus do you have to install an iOS app or an Android app, what have you? Becomes another challenge to consider for the tools that are used at this level. User adoption, ease of use is an easy one in relationship with the need for the tool to be simple. Obtaining, maintaining hardware is an obvious one. And then language unification on upload, because the end data is expected to be coming in different languages. Ideally, for more centralized processing, they are unified in a centralized platform that can interpret and report across that data. So the tools that we see oftentimes can range anywhere from more specialized tools like Resco, Kobo Connect, ComCare, ODK, to our trusty Excels and paper forms. So they're all the varieties that we have seen at point of service.
I think worth adding as a little bit of color commentary, there's been a ton of innovation at this level in the last decade, right? There's a real proliferation of apps and solutions at this level. So, really worth taking a look at what's out there and what your needs are. And another thing to keep in mind is, if you're collecting data over time about the same individuals or the same households, having a tool that's a little bit more geared at case management, say, a ComCare or Resco sort of tool, is probably going to be more sustainable in the long run than a tool that's more geared at like one-off surveys, cross-sectional surveys, like a Kobo sort of tool, despite the fact that obviously getting up and running with a quick Kobo form is much easier. But you also want to think about how much time do you have to get up and running. If you're working in an emergency context, right, you kind of just you may need to just swallow that and get going and work with Kobo or ODK or even paper. Cool. Sorry, Utsav.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the addition, Zach. Next one that we look at is the local office level. So once we have data coming in from the point of service level, that's relatively defined. The local office, we are thinking of data along the lines of service delivery. So what's the service database for this local office? What is the participant list? What is the total enrollment? So things that go over a longer arc of time, data that needs to be managed over a longer arc of time would be collected at the local office level. And we see different tools and the desires change at this level. They look something like, we want an easy form builder tool, which should be quick to adapt. We should have the ability to localize so that every change we want in this tool should not take 3 months or 6 months of development, because our forms are going to be relatively dynamic, and we're going to change the survey that we're collecting, or the service that we are offering is more than just one templatized service over the next 6 months. Challenges, some of them are similar to the point of service level, which is around user adoption, training for local office staff. Aligning on one data model across many locations, this is an interesting one and a new one that you start encountering as you come to a more centralized location within the organization, where if your point of service tools have been relatively independent in terms of their data collection, the local office is the first level where you would ideally want your programs and your locations to centralize on a relatively similar or the same data model, so that the analysis and analytics that you want to do for decision making at the local office level is functional at that level. And that ties into the streamlined reporting challenge that you run into as well. Tools that we have seen at the local office level, again, can be Salesforce, can be ComCare, or again, Excel is ever so prevalent even today for centralized data management at the local office level. The next one we have is the national or regional offices. This is where we're no longer talking about individual attendances, individual survey tracking, or even individual services, but more thinking about it from a program management or project management lens for an organization. So what are our projects that we need to run? What is the indicator framework for that project? How do we track success of that project? What are the KPIs? What are the results we want to track? What are the ways we can slice and dice the results so that we can see different views of the reach, depth, feedback, and storytelling of our projects and programs? That becomes sort of the MEL data that we see at the national and regional level. A lot of it is looking at the data at an aggregate level, and hence one of the key desires and needs here is data ingestion from different sources, more granular sources, and aggregation of that data. Also relating it with the project management tools or the finance management tools for the organization that might be maybe used for funding those projects or for reporting finances of those projects. Quality assurance becomes an important one and a bit of a more pertinent desire at this stage, because the data that's being ingested and aggregated needs to be trustworthy and come from sources that get at least a level of quality check before they get to a centralized national or regional level for an organization. Another need that we have seen is just the need to have a little more automation around data management, so that the data work that has already happened at the different levels is not repeated and can be done automatically by the tools that are used by the organization. The challenges we run into go hand in hand with those, which is how do you unify data across coming from multiple sources, whether those are field service tools or whether those are local office based tools. Some of your offices might be using Excel, others might be using ComCare, others might be using Salesforce. How do you unify them across the board at the national or regional level? How do you map the data coming from different sources to a single data model and a centralized data source, and make sure that you are comparing apples to apples when you're looking at data across multiple regions and multiple localities? Um, and lastly, building a story from the data. It's no longer just individual stories. You want your data at this stage to tell you a story about the project, about how the success of the program as well. The tools that we see here start veering more towards structural and enterprise-wide data management, like AMP Impact, or you'll see a lot of analytics being used through Power BI, Tableau, DHIS2, or again, our trusty Excel is always there in today's time. The last one within the organization is headquarters or HQ. This is one where most commonly we see program management happening, similar to the national level for national NGOs, and project management happening, accountability based MEL data. So think approvals, think data management through assignments. Reporting needs out of MEL tools and analytics need come very high on the needs here for an organization. The reporting needs also have an aspect of timeliness of those reports, because data is coming through multiple layers. There's an assumed time delay that organizations are trying to reduce more and more as near real time as possible. Data needs to be reported at the HQ level. Data quality is another big need that we have seen. Visualization in different ways of slicing and dicing the MEL data, and a simplified way that you can get this MEL data from the headquarter level out to your funders or out to public sources becomes a key need at this level as well. The challenges that we run into is primarily around timely distribution. What is the frequency of MEL data capture? How do we reliably get MEL data to flow through the levels and follow a particular frequency? The data sources, trusting the data sources, the quality checks at the data source level, and then accuracy of reporting. So once it does land in the centralized HQ tool, how do you ensure accuracy of reporting? The tools, again, look slightly similar to the national levels here, where you see AMP Impact or DHIS2 or Power BI Tableau, or more static reports that you would see through PDFs or PowerPoints or Excels come into play as well.
I think one quick point to keep in mind here is like what we've seen is there just isn't one tool or solution that is going to meet the needs of across all the different levels, or certainly not out of the box. There's no turnkey tool that we know of, but if you know of one, we want to know about it, that will, really meet the flexibility, usability, language, quickly spin up new forms with different data structures needed at the local level, as well as the analytics and vids needs at HQ level, publishing of data and so forth, right? So integration, as Utsav was talking about, data flow between systems, and the ability to aggregate data up from more transactional systems up to the tools you're using at HQ is really key to really the sustainability of an overall system or set of solutions. Cool. Go to the last one.
Yeah. And lastly, we have the external destinations, right? Whether it's funder reports or public websites or public-facing websites or IRT, the needs are very similar to HQ. They need timely reports. They need quality data to be available. The data visualization should have different dimensions to it. And the challenges, again, remain the same. It's just timely distribution of that data, trusting the data source, accuracy in reporting, as well as a lot of time specific indicator configuration when it comes to MEL data. So it's not just based on what the organization's framework might be, MEL framework might be, but also the destination, the funders or the IRT framework for indicators as well. And again, we see a couple of new tools show up. A number of times these would be custom tools. So you'll see a custom database that organizations need to report into, or a Salesforce-based system or an AMP Impact-based system, or just analytics-based systems as well.
Cool. And thanks, Chloe, for asking us to spell out the acronym. We can certainly talk more about IATI if folks are interested in it, but you've got definitely hundreds and hundreds of organizations publishing their project data to IATI, but much more financial data getting published than impact data these days, which I think is an interesting opportunity. Let's look at it. Let's think about it that way.
Yeah, and as Zach mentioned in the point of service example, there's been a lot of innovation that we have seen over the last decade, more than that. We have seen incremental innovation in other levels, within other levels as well. But one of the biggest areas where we see the need for the sector's need for more innovation is across the levels. So how does data move across different levels? What is the right way of ingestion? What is the right way of dissemination of that data? Because the tools are not, there's no single tool and the tools are not consistent, it becomes very difficult to have data move through and make coherent sense across the organization with
perhaps most importantly, to save time involved in getting data from one place to another place. I think for many organizations, it's a very cumbersome process, whether that's setting up highly technical integrations or whether it's manually just extracting and transforming data and loading it or inputting it into funder portals or wherever it may be.
Yeah,
cool.
Absolutely. With all those challenges and needs now, there's a framework that we propose and we have sort of learned over time that I'm going to turn it over to Zach to talk about.
Great, and I'll try to keep this brief, and do feel free to pop any questions in the chat as we're popping through here. So really, it's not like good MEL is not all about technology, right? Tech plays one role in it, but good MEL really comes down to 4 pillars of monitoring evaluation. We published a piece on our blog and the Salesforce.org blog actually a few years ago about this, if you want to unpack it a little bit more. But I'll just briefly introduce the model. Just I find it's a helpful way of thinking through things. So it starts with a sound strategy, with suitable methods, with strong systems, and with sufficient capacity. And just like with the types of MEL data, we need to nail all of these 4 things if we really want to have strong monitoring, evaluation, and learning data and practices over time in an organization. So I'll just quickly explain each one. Rapid fire. So strategy is usually built around a logic model, a coherent logic model. This is kind of M&E 101. So for some of you, maybe kind of old hat. So I won't spend too much time on it. But if you're curious about it, you can find a template online. Just Google logic model template. And it'll really help for mapping out, from your inputs, what do you need to run your program, the activities that you're doing, the outputs, your immediate results of running that program, the outcomes. So what changes are you producing in behavior or other sorts of meaningful changes that you're producing for individuals or for communities, and then the impacts or the big goals, the society-wide or community-wide changes that are being achieved or that we're working to achieve. And then within these, particularly within outputs and outcomes, clearly defining indicators that we're going to measure to track our progress, and then having sensible plans for those indicators. So actually mapping out for each indicator, what is that indicator? How are we collecting it? Where is it going to be collected? When is it going to be collected? Who's collecting it? How are we going to analyze it? And if you can't answer all those questions, it shouldn't be an indicator. It shouldn't be part of the plan. Right? Like, you really want to streamline and reduce the number of indicators that you're tracking if you can, and make sure you're really, really clear on all of these questions with respect to each indicator that's important for the organization. Second piece is methods. So here it's all about standardization and consistency. So just having consistent templates over time that we're using to collect data. You want to use an appropriate level of rigor, right? So it comes back to those questions, right? What questions are we asking in the strategy? What indicators are we using? If we're asking questions around effectiveness, we're going to need to use a more rigorous and thoughtful level of design or type of design than if we're just tracking outputs, kind of inputs and outputs, right? When I think about bias and confounding, if we had more time, we could kind of unpack each of those. But what are the kind of limitations to your methods, and being really honest with yourself and with the other stakeholders about those limitations, particularly with respect to bias that might exist or be introduced, or confounding other things that could explain results. And then you want to think about data quality from a perspective of timeliness, validity, consistency, and so forth. Your systems. So there's really three big questions to ask about systems. We spent a lot of time talking about systems today. The questions are, is it going to meet our needs today? Is it going to meet our needs in 5 years? And what is it going to cost, right? And we have a little framework that we use for breaking that down, which again, you can check out on our blog, on the Vera Solutions blog. And so these are the 10 criteria to evaluate in choosing a tool or technology. And this really applies across the board, not just to monitoring and evaluation, but for thinking about will it meet our needs today, it's really the features, the user friendliness, the security. Will it meet our needs in 5 years? We don't know what all the needs are going to be in 5 years. So that's going to come down to the flexibility of the tool, the ability to build some new functionality or adapt the tool, the interoperability, right? Connecting it to other tools, getting data flowing into the system and out of that system. Innovation. So is that tool static, or is it getting better and better? Is there a community that's committed to making it better over time? And the ecosystem around it. Are there just a couple developers that know this tool, or is there actually a whole ecosystem of people that are using it that we can lean on and learn from? And then for cost, you want to think holistically about total cost of ownership, not just about setup costs or about license costs, but also about the ongoing maintenance costs for a solution, whether those are really tangible maintenance costs with hardware or otherwise, or if they're kind of intangible maintenance costs, like people pulling their hair out because their spreadsheet is wasting them tons of time and energy. So that's kind of how to think about systems. And then capacity, lastly, is really comes down to capable person hours. So people need the skills for collection, management, analysis, and utilization of data. They need data literacy, but they also need time for these activities. And oftentimes the people that have the time don't have the skills, and the people that have the skills don't have the time, right? So it really does require some ongoing investment and commitment from the organization if you want to have really sustainable, strong monitoring evaluation practices. The more capacity that you build and sustain, the more rigorous evidence ultimately you're going to be able to develop and generate as an organization, and from that be able to hopefully attract more resources and grow your programs. So if we put this together, the pillars of impact data, good impact data, the types of impact data, you can put it together into a 4x4 matrix here, right? And I think that this can be a helpful framework for starting to prioritize how you might be improving or advancing monitoring, evaluation, and learning at your organization. So one thing you could do is you could do a bit of a red, amber, green exercise across this matrix. So take stock of where do you think the organization is, you yourself, or engage some other stakeholders, some other staff in this process. Where are we at in terms of each of these cells, right? Our strategy, our methods, our systems, our capacity for reach, for depth, for feedback, and for stories. So what you might find, I was just running a training actually yesterday with a group of social entrepreneurs here in DC, and a common theme for them was methods for depth was kind of the consistent area of weakness across many of them, right? Or strategy for depth.